Rain in Seattle did not fall so much as it pressed itself against the world, a steady cold weight that made every sidewalk feel lonelier. Emily Reyes stood beneath the weak glow of a flickering street lamp. Fingers curled around the handle of a suitcase that was older than she was, its wheels dragging uneven tracks through puddles. Her black hair clung to her cheeks, soaked through, and her thin diner uniform offered no protection against the wind that sliced down the narrow street like a warning. She had finished her shift only 20 minutes ago, a double shift that left her legs trembling and her shoulders stiff, but she had not been allowed to rest. Instead, she had returned to the tiny room she rented behind an aging apartment complex on Capitol Hill, only to find the landlord waiting at the door. He stood with the confidence of someone who knew the law was on his side, holding a printed notice in his hand and tapping his foot impatiently as though she were late for an appointment she had never agreed to. He told her the rent was increasing by almost half, and that if she could not pay, she had 48 hours to leave. When she stammered that she needed more time, needed until Friday to pick up an extra shift, he shook his head as if she had insulted him personally. Rules are rules. Try somewhere else. The door shut, and the lock clicked with finality. There was no discussion and no compassion. She had begged for a chance for a single day, but he handed her the notice and pointed toward the street. The decision had been made long before she arrived. Now she was out in the rain with nowhere to sleep. The suitcase felt heavier with each step as she dragged it along the wet pavement. Her sneakers were soaked through her breath unsteady, and the cold had settled into her bones. She kept walking because stopping meant facing the truth she had been avoiding for weeks. Money was gone. Savings gone. School on hold. Every paycheck went to rent and leftover college fees she had been chipping away at $5 at a time. She wanted to believe she was strong enough to handle anything that she could push through like she always had, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the world had finally decided it had taken enough from her and wanted the rest too. A car passed by, spraying a sheet of water across her feet. She winced and lifted the suitcase higher, her arms trembling. The neon sign of the diner she worked at glowed a few blocks behind her. Inside were warm lights and familiar chaos and the smell of burnt coffee and fried onions. It was not much, but it had been a kind of home. Now it was just a reminder that she was alone. Emily stopped beneath the awning of a closed drugstore and pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes, trying to breathe. She hated crying in public. It made her feel exposed, and she already felt too exposed standing there with everything she owned stuffed into a weathered bag. The rain drummed against the metal awning in a relentless rhythm. She exhaled, shakily wiped her face, and tried to plan her next move. Maybe the 24-hour laundromat would let her sit inside. Maybe she could wait out the night there. Maybe she could call someone from work to ask for a couch, but pride kept her phone in her pocket. She did not want pity. She wanted stability just enough to breathe. But tonight, even that seemed too far out of reach. She took a step forward. The world blurred through the rain and the streetlights smeared into streaks of yellow and white. A gust of wind cut across her shoulders and she pulled her jacket tighter, teeth chattering. Just keep walking, one foot in front of the other. She was halfway across the intersection when headlights cut through the rain. A sleek black car slowed beside her, its engine a quiet hum that barely rose above the sound of the storm. She kept her gaze down, telling herself not to stare. Cars like that belonged in another world, one she had no business looking at. The window lowered. Emily froze. Suitcase halfway lifted from the ground. A man sat inside, dark hair slightly mussed, jaw sharp beneath the dim glow of the dashboard. His eyes met hers with a steady, unreadable expression. For a moment she thought she was imagining it, that exhaustion had finally warped reality. The rain reflected in the glass made his face look almost unreal. Ethan Hale watched her from behind the wheel, though she did not know his name yet. She only saw a stranger in an expensive car, a stranger who looked at her as if he saw something she did not know she was showing. Water rolled down her face like a second skin and she blinked against the cold, unsure whether to step back or keep walking. The street was empty. The storm was merciless. and the man in the car did not look away. They did not speak, not yet. But in that brief, suspended moment, something shifted. Somewhere deep inside, the night fate exhaled, rearranged itself, and began pulling two separate lives toward the same inevitable collision. They stood on opposite sides of the world, but the world was about to close that distance. One heartbeat, one glance through the rain, one breath before everything changed. One moment that neither of them understood yet, but would remember forever. She tightened her grip on the suitcase. He lifted his gaze toward her fully. The rain fell harder, and the story began. Seattle's skyline stretched beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 38th floor where Ethan Hale stood with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set in a tight line. The city glowed beneath the rain, a mosaic of amber lights reflected on slick rooftops and dark water. From up here, the storm looked like a moving curtain of silver, distant and harmless, but Ethan knew better. Storms always looked beautiful until they were close enough to ruin something. He had learned that lesson early. Hale Point Capital's headquarters was quiet at this hour, the echo of his footsteps long since faded. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving the building to the hum of the servers and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Ethan preferred it this way. Noise irritated him. Pretending irritated him more, and he had spent most of his adult life pretending to be the man his family demanded he become. He lifted the glass of water on the table but did not drink it. His mind was elsewhere, locked on the email he had opened just minutes earlier, a reminder from the Hale family attorney written with the cold precision of legal language. Deadline approaching. You must secure a marriage before Q4. Failure to comply will result in immediate transfer of control to Richard Hale. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The words were clinical simple, yet heavy enough to pull his stomach into a knot. It was not that he feared losing money. He had enough personal wealth to live comfortably for several lifetimes. It was the principle. The company was built by his grandfather and his father before the collapse that destroyed everything. Richard had stood by during those years like a vulture waiting for scraps, and Ethan refused to let him take control now. His father's downfall had left lasting marks. Ethan remembered being 17, standing in their old home as reporters swarmed the driveway, microphones pointed at his mother while she tried not to cry. He remembered his father, once respected, sitting silently at the dinner table staring at papers he could not save. The boy, he had been learned one lesson from that humiliation. Trust no one. Love no one. Let no one get close enough to hurt you. Success became his armor. Efficiency became his language. Distance became his safety. And it worked. Hale Point grew under his leadership from a modest firm to one of Seattle's most influential investment giants. He became the man everyone respected, but no one truly knew. But now, with the deadline closing in, the armor he had built around himself felt like a cage. Marriage. Not love, not partnership, not companionship. A requirement. A rule to satisfy a board of relatives who cared more about image than truth. He rubbed his temples, tired of the charade. The PR team had suggested several candidates. Models, heiresses, CEOs' daughters, all polished, trained, flawless. All wrong. They smiled too widely, spoke too softly, agreed too quickly. He had rejected them all. They did not want him. They wanted the name Hale, the influence, the wealth, and Ethan refused to marry someone who saw him as a stepping stone. That was why his mind kept drifting back to the moment from a month ago, the moment that still replayed in quiet hours like this one. He had been driving home from a late meeting, irritated, exhausted, thinking about how impossible the trust requirement felt. Turning onto an underpass road, the city unusually empty that night, he saw a girl crouched near a sleeping bag tucked under the bridge. She wore a cheap jacket and held a small takeout container in her hands. Without hesitation, she placed the food beside an older man who slept curled against the concrete wall, then covered him gently with a blanket she must have brought from home. She whispered something he could not hear. Then she walked away, her steps tired but steady. She had not looked around to see if anyone was watching. She did not take a photo or post it online. She had no audience. She simply cared. Ethan had slowed the car watching her disappear around the corner. It bothered him for days. Someone who gives even when she has nothing. People like that were rare. People like that did not orbit his world. When he saw her again tonight, drenched, shivering, dragging a suitcase through the rain with her chin lifted as if refusing to break something inside him, shifted. He recognized her, though she had no idea who he was. Something like instinct pushed him to stop the car. Not impulse, not charity. Recognition. She was the same girl from that night under the bridge. The same girl who would feed a stranger even when she barely had enough for herself. In a world full of people who took and took, she gave. That was why he stopped. That was why he rolled down the window. That was why, for the first time in years, he felt something other than exhaustion. He glanced again at the email glowing on his phone screen. The deadline felt closer than ever, like a clock ticking behind his ribs. The board would pounce if he failed. Richard, especially. His uncle had been waiting for this moment since the family decided Ethan would inherit the largest share. Richard hid his jealousy behind civility, but Ethan saw through it. He always had. Losing control of Hale Point meant giving Richard the power to undo everything Ethan had rebuilt after his father's collapse. He could not allow that. But he also could not marry someone who disgusted him with their pretense. His phone vibrated with another message. A PR director reminding him of a luncheon tomorrow where potential marriage candidates would be present. He locked the screen without reading further. None of them mattered. None had ever mattered. His thoughts kept drifting back to the girl in the rain, to the way her hands trembled, but she kept moving, to the way she tried to hide her fear behind a brave expression, to the way she stared at the pavement as if refusing to let anyone see her break. He did not know her story, but he knew goodness when he saw it. And goodness was something he did not have enough of in his life. He turned away from the window and picked up his coat jaw set with a decision he had not fully processed yet. The storm outside raged harder, lightning flickering against the skyline. But for the first time in months, maybe years, Ethan felt not trapped by circumstances but pulled toward possibility. He had stopped the car tonight for a reason he could not ignore. He had looked at her and recognized something he had not expected. Not a solution, not convenience. A chance. A chance to choose differently. A chance to break the pattern. A chance to rewrite the one rule he had always lived by. Do not let anyone close. But she was already closer than she should be. He exhaled, slow and uneven, as he stepped toward the elevator. Tomorrow, the world would still demand its deadlines and expectations. But tonight, he could make one choice that was his alone. One choice that might change everything. Rain hammered against the pavement in relentless sheets as Emily stood frozen beside her battered suitcase, unsure whether the man in the sleek black car was actually speaking to her, or if exhaustion had finally blurred reality. The window remained open, letting cold droplets drift inside, but the man did not seem bothered. His gaze stayed steady, calm, in a way that contrasted sharply with the storm tearing through the street. "Are you okay?" The question lingered in the air, simple, yet startling. People rarely asked if she was okay. Most days she barely asked herself. She swallowed hard, brushing wet hair from her face, trying to hide how violently her hands were shaking. "I am fine," she managed, though her voice cracked on the last word. It was not believable. She knew it. He knew it. Anyone with eyes could see she was soaked to the skin, freezing and moments away from collapsing. The man stepped out of the car, rain soaking into his dark coat instantly. Up close, he looked even more intimidating. Sharp jawline. Eyes the color of tempered steel. Presence heavy enough to make the night feel smaller around them. But his voice softened when he spoke again. "You should not be out here. The storm is getting worse." She tried to lift her suitcase, but her fingers slipped on the wet handle. He noticed. Without asking, he moved to steady it with one hand. His touch was firm, but not forceful. His height cast a shield against the rain for a brief second, and she felt unexpectedly protected, a sensation so foreign she almost stepped back from it. "I can help you get somewhere warm," he said. "Just until the storm passes." His tone was practical, not pitying. She hesitated. She had been taught her whole life that accepting help usually came with strings attached, that kindness often hid expectations, that trusting the wrong person could cost more than refusing them. She opened her mouth to decline. Then a gust of icy wind ripped through her thin jacket and stole the refusal straight from her lungs. Her teeth chattered. Her legs trembled. She realized the laundromat she had planned to shelter in was 15 blocks away, and she might not even make it that far. He must have seen the conflict flicker across her expression because his gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "Just temporary," he repeated quietly. "Somewhere warm. You look like you need a break from the rain." His voice held no urgency, no pressure, just an honest offer made by someone who could easily turn away but chose not to. She nodded once. Small, unsure, but yes. He opened the passenger door for her. She slid inside, carefully terrified she would leave a puddle on the luxurious seat. The interior smelled faintly of clean leather and something warm she could not place. Her hands curled in her lap, trying to hide their shaking. The man got back into the driver's seat, rain dripping from his coat as he shut the door. For a moment, silence filled the car, broken only by the muted roar of the storm outside. She stared at the dashboard, too embarrassed to make eye contact. He drove a few blocks before speaking again, his tone gentle but steady. "There is a cafe that stays open all night. It is safe, well lit. You can sit there until the storm passes." She nodded again. "Thank you." Her voice was barely audible. He did not comment on it. Instead, he turned on the heater, letting warm air circulate through the cabin. The sudden contrast against her frozen skin made her eyes sting. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of a stranger. Minutes later, he pulled up beside a small 24-hour cafe tucked under a glowing sign. The windows were fogged silhouettes of late-night customers moving behind them. "This is fine," she whispered. "Thank you for this." He parked instead of letting her climb out immediately. When she finally forced herself to look at him, she saw him studying her carefully but not unkindly. "You have had a rough night." She let out a humorless breath. "Something like that." He rested his hands on the steering wheel, thoughtful. "Do you have somewhere to go after this cafe closes?" A question she dreaded. A question with only one answer. No, not anymore. She watched his expression shift, not with judgment, but with a quiet understanding that startled her, as if he recognized the weight she carried because he had carried something similar once too. He nodded slowly as though confirming something he had already suspected. "Come inside," he said gently. "Warm up. We can talk." She should have refused. She barely knew him. But something in his calm steadiness anchored her. She followed him inside the bell over the cafe door, jingling softly as warm air enveloped her. They chose a booth in the back where the lights were dimmer. She wrapped her cold fingers around the steaming mug the barista handed her, and felt the sensation return to her hands in painful pricks. The man sat across from her, coat folded beside him, raindrops still clinging to the ends of his hair. For the first time, she allowed herself to look at him properly. He looked like someone carved from discipline and distance. But his eyes held something unexpected, something gentle, something aware. She cleared her throat. "I am sorry about the mess I probably made in your car." "You did not make a mess," he answered simply. His calmness made her chest tighten. He watched her quietly for a moment before asking, "What happened tonight?" She hesitated again, but for some reason telling him did not feel dangerous. "My landlord raised the rent. 45%? I could not pay it. He gave me 48 hours to leave, and then tonight he said I had to go immediately." She looked down at her mug. "So now I am here with everything I own in a suitcase." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, not in anger at her, but in anger on her behalf. "That is unacceptable," she almost laughed. "It is normal, actually. Happens to people all the time." His gaze sharpened as though he disagreed with the idea that cruelty could ever be normal. She did not know why that look affected her so deeply. She lifted her eyes and met his directly for the first time. Something passed between them. Awareness. Recognition. He leaned forward slightly. I saw you once before, under the bridge near Pike Street. You gave food to a man sleeping there. She blinked, startled. You remember that? Yeah. His voice was quiet but certain. I remember good people. The cafe seemed to shrink around them. The noise dimmed. The world narrowed to a booth in the corner and a truth hanging between two strangers. She swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this? Because it is the reason I stopped the car tonight. He lifted his gaze fully, and for the first time she saw something unguarded in him. Something raw. Something looking for a place to land. She did not breathe for a moment. He did not either. The rain crashed against the windows, filling the silence between them with something electric. Then he spoke, voice low and certain. I have a proposition. For a long moment, Emily thought she had misheard him. The clatter of dishes behind the counter, the low hum of conversation from the other late-night customers, even the steady beat of rain against the windows, seemed to fade as the words sank in. A proposition. People like him did not make propositions to people like her. She wrapped her hands tighter around the warm mug, grounding herself before she could drift into a panic she could not afford. She lifted her gaze slowly. He was watching her with an expression she could not read. Something caught between calculation and something strangely human. Something that made her pulse stutter. She swallowed. What do you mean? Ethan leaned back slightly in the booth as though preparing to reveal something he had carried for a long time, not a plan he made tonight. Something older, something settled, something heavy. I need a wife. His tone was controlled, steady, but the sentence hit her with the force of an unexpected wave. Her fingertips went numb around the mug. She blinked once, twice, certain she had misheard him again. I am sorry, what? He did not flinch. I need a wife. Not romantically, not emotionally. Legally. For a set period of time. 12 months. It sounded like a business negotiation. A contract. An offer made in the same tone one might use to purchase a company or acquire a new asset. But even so, there was something vaguely apologetic in his eyes, as if he knew this sounded insane, yet felt compelled to say it anyway. Emily stared at him, stunned into silence. Her heart thudded unevenly, a mix of fear and disbelief threading through her ribs. Why would you say something like that? Because it is the truth. My family trust requires me to be married before I turn 35. If I am not, control of my company transfers to my uncle. She tried to process that, tried to understand why he would tell her, why he would choose her of all people. She shook her head slightly. But you do not even know me. His gaze darkened a fraction. That is not entirely true. I have seen enough to know who you are. She felt heat rise to her face, unsure if she should be flattered or terrified. He continued, voice steady. You helped a stranger when you had nothing. You work hard. You carry yourself with honesty, and most importantly, you do not want anything from me. That last part stung, not because it was wrong, but because it revealed how many people in his world wanted something from him. She lowered her eyes. That does not mean you should marry me. No, it does not, he agreed softly. But it means you are the only person I trust to do this without an agenda. She rubbed her fingers against the warm ceramic, grounding herself again. Emily searched his face for signs of mockery, manipulation, anything that might hint this was a trap. But all she saw was sincerity, layered under exhaustion. A man pushed into a corner by pressures she could not fully grasp. She exhaled shakily. What exactly are you asking of me? A 1-year marriage contract, he said plainly. You would have housing, financial stability, and at the end of the term, a significant payout. She stiffened. There it was. Money. The thing that made every kind gesture suspicious. She narrowed her eyes. So I am supposed to pretend to be your wife for a year in exchange for what? A check. He held her gaze. Yes, but I am not buying you. I am offering a partnership. Mutually beneficial. She felt her throat tighten. Part of her wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Another part wanted to cry from exhaustion. He studied her, reading her thoughts with unsettling clarity. You look like someone who has run out of options. She bristled, offended even if it was true. I am not desperate. He nodded once. I did not say desperate. I said tired. She froze. Because that word felt too accurate, too close, too sharp. She lifted her chin. How would this even work? There would be rules, he said, public appearances, social events, living arrangements, a story we present to the world. Her palms grew damp. Living arrangements. Before she could stop herself, the question slipped out. Do we have to share a bed? The words trembled out of her unsteady and fragile, and she immediately wished she could pull them back. But he did not mock her. He did not smirk. Instead, his expression softened in a way she had not expected from someone who looked so controlled. Not unless you want to. The reassurance landed like warmth in her chest, unexpected and disarming. He continued, There will be clear boundaries. Nothing happens without your consent. Nothing happens that makes you uncomfortable. This is a business arrangement, not a personal one. She studied him again. The crisp lines of his coat, the restrained elegance of his posture, the tired set of his shoulders. He looked like a man who had spent years carrying an empire on his back, a man who had never been allowed to choose softness-only strategy. Why me? She whispered it without meaning to, because you are the only real person I have met in years. The confession startled her. It startled him, too. His jaw flexed as if he regretted saying it aloud. Emily pressed a hand over her eyes, overwhelmed. This was madness. She was a waitress living paycheck to paycheck. She had no reason to trust a billionaire whose world she did not understand. And yet, she was exhausted, homeless, cold, cornered by circumstance. And the offer he made was not cruel, not degrading, oddly respectful, carefully constructed. Something inside her cracked under the weight of survival and possibility. If I say no, she asked quietly, what happens? Nothing. I will drive you wherever you want to go. You owe me nothing. But if I say yes, then you will have a home, safety, stability, and I will have what I need to protect everything I have built. Her heart pounded. She had spent years fighting alone, years convincing herself she did not need help. But tonight she was out of choices, out of luck, out of places to sleep. She took a long breath. Then another. Her voice came out as a whisper. I will do it. His expression did not change dramatically, but something subtle shifted. Relief, perhaps, or recognition. He extended a hand across the table. She stared at it, unsure, then placed her cold fingers in his warm grip. Very well, he said. We begin tomorrow. Her chest tightened with fear and something else she could not name. She had no idea this single choice would unravel everything she believed about herself and rewrite her life in ways she could not yet imagine. She walked out of the cafe beside him, rain easing slightly as if the storm itself had paused to witness the moment two destinies quietly intersected. She did not know it yet, neither did he. But the contract was only the beginning. The next morning arrived faster than Emily expected, the night offering little rest as her mind wrestled with the decision she had made. When Ethan's car pulled up outside the cafe where she had stayed until dawn, she felt a sharp twist of nerves in her stomach. She had not slept. She had barely eaten. And yet she climbed into the passenger seat because backing out now felt impossible. She told herself she was being practical. She told herself she was doing what anyone in her circumstances would do. But a quiet part of her whispered that nothing about this was ordinary. He drove in silence, his posture straight yet strangely relaxed as if he had already accepted the changes ahead while she was still struggling to comprehend them. It was not until they crossed the bridge toward Bellevue that she began to understand just how different his world was. Glass towers rose from manicured streets. Luxury storefronts glowed even in the early morning light. People walking along the sidewalks looked polished even in gym clothes. Everything felt purposeful, curated, expensive. Too expensive. Her throat tightened. She pulled her jacket closer, suddenly conscious of the fraying threads along the sleeves. When the elevator doors opened inside his private building, she hesitated. The space was bright and cold, lined with marble floors and quiet music humming through hidden speakers. Ethan stepped inside first. He motioned for her to follow. She did. The elevator rose smoothly, almost soundless, faster than any she had ever been in. When the doors opened again, she found herself inside the penthouse. Her breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the view of Lake Washington shimmering beneath pale morning light. The open living space stretched wider than the entire floor of the diner she worked at. The kitchen gleamed with chrome appliances. Digital screens embedded in the walls displayed soft, ambient colors. She heard herself whisper, "This is where you live." Ethan nodded. "It is where we will both live for the next year." The words landed like a weight in her chest. She knew this was part of the arrangement, but hearing it aloud made the reality sharper. He walked ahead, his strides confident, yet controlled. Emily followed slowly, absorbing the details with hesitant steps. The penthouse felt both beautiful and lonely, designed perfectly yet missing something human. Everything looked expensive, but nothing felt alive. Ethan pointed toward a hallway. "Your room is at the end. You will have privacy. No one will enter without permission." She swallowed, grateful for the reassurance. "Thank you." A faint nod. He lifted a sleek black binder from the counter and handed it to her. "This is the contract binder." She took it carefully, her palms sweating. Inside were printed pages, colored tabs, schedules. She flipped through the contents. Public appearance dates. A timeline of how their relationship should appear to develop. Outfits for events. Talking points. Phrases she would need to memorize. A fabricated story about how they met. Her breath stilled. "You want people to think we met at a gala." Ethan leaned one shoulder against the counter. "It is cleaner than the truth. The truth would raise questions we cannot answer." She nodded slowly. It made sense. Every piece of this arrangement was designed with precision, efficiency, control. He pointed toward a section marked with red. "That is where you will find boundaries for physical contact during events. They are straightforward. Hand placements, when to link arms, how long to hold a pose during photographs." Her face heated. "So this is really happening." "Yes." She closed the binder. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied them. "What if I mess something up?" "You will not." His voice was calm, certain, almost gentle in its firmness. Her heart tightened. She wished she could borrow even a fraction of his confidence. A chime echoed through the penthouse. He turned his head. "The stylist and the assistant. They will help you prepare for the first public event next week." Her pulse jumped. "Right now, yes." The door opened and two women entered. One carried garment bags, the other held a tablet. They greeted Ethan warmly, then turned their attention to Emily with a professional smile. "Hello, Miss Reyes. We are here to assist you with wardrobe posture and general presentation." Emily froze. Presentation? The word felt like a reminder that she did not belong here, that she was being shaped into something more acceptable to the world he lived in. She tightened her grip on the binder. The stylist unzipped one of the garment bags and revealed a soft, cream dress, elegant yet simple. "This will photograph well next to Mr. Hale. We chose colors that match his usual palette." Emily felt heat flood her cheeks. "He has a palette." The assistant smiled politely. "Of course. Brand consistency is important." Emily stared at the dress, feeling as though she were watching someone else's life unfold. Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady. "It is a lot. I know. You can take your time." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "I am scared I will disappoint you." For the first time, something softened in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore so naturally. "You are not here to impress me. You are here because you have a good heart. That is enough." The words were simple, but they sent a warm pulse through her chest. No one had ever said something like that to her without wanting something in return. She looked down quickly before he could see the impact his words had. The stylist guided her toward a dressing area while Ethan stepped into his office, giving her space. She changed slowly, carefully, afraid to tear the delicate fabric even though it fit her perfectly. When she finally stepped out, the assistant adjusted the neckline and smoothed the hem. Then they stepped aside so Ethan could see. He looked up. For a second, he said nothing. His gaze traveled from her shoes to her shoulders, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that suggested he was seeing the full picture of what she would represent in his world. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like it belongs to someone else," she admitted. His jaw tightened slightly. "It belongs to you as much as it needs to." Her breath caught. The stylist packed up their tools, and the assistant reviewed the upcoming schedule while Emily tried to absorb every detail. There were charity events, a luncheon, a company gala where they would be officially introduced as a couple. When the women finally left, the penthouse fell quiet again. Emily set the binder down and felt the full weight of everything pressing into her: the room, the contract, the future. Ethan approached slowly, careful not to crowd her. "We will go through everything together. You do not need to figure this out alone." She met his gaze, surprised by how sincere he sounded. "Thank you." She did not expect that he would return the softness she offered him. Yet here he was, not unkind, not distant, just careful, a man trying to hold together two worlds and asking her to help him keep them balanced. The evening sunlight dipped over the lake, casting a warm glow across the penthouse floor. Emily realized this was her life now, a place she never belonged to, but where she would have to pretend she did. And tomorrow, the world would begin to see her beside him. Seattle Tech Summit gleamed like a world made of glass and ambition when Ethan's car pulled up to the entrance. Spotlights swept across the plaza, illuminating photographers clustered behind velvet ropes, their cameras raised like weapons waiting to fire. The air buzzed with tech chatter, media murmurs, and the kind of sharp excitement that only billion-dollar ideas could generate. Emily stared through the window, her breath catching as nerves tangled inside her chest. She had been to crowded diners, noisy bars, chaotic street fairs, but she had never stepped into a space where every pair of eyes measured worth before compassion. And tonight she was meant to walk straight into the center of it. Her palms dampened against her dress as she whispered, "I am not sure I can do this." Ethan glanced at her, his expression steady in a way that grounded her far more than his words ever could. "You will do fine." She forced a breath. "You sound very confident about that." "I am." There was no softness in the statement, just a certainty, as if he had already decided she would not fail. He stepped out first, adjusting his jacket. The moment his shoes touched the pavement, cameras exploded in flashes, the crowd shifting in recognition. Ethan Hale. Hale Point Capital. Seattle's golden sun, the future of the Hale Empire. Then the questions flew. "Ethan, do you have a comment on the upcoming acquisition?" "Ethan, is it true you rejected the corporate marriage candidates?" "Ethan, how close are you to announcing your engagement?" He ignored them all. He circled the car, opened Emily's door, and offered his hand. For one heartbeat, she hesitated. Taking it meant stepping into a lie that the world would believe, a lie that would shape her life for the next year. But leaving it untouched meant backing out of something she had already promised. So she placed her hand in his fingers, trembling slightly. He helped her up with a gentle steadiness that did not match the coldness she had assumed he carried everywhere. And then the flashes intensified. Voices rose. The crowd surged. "Who is she? Is that Ethan's date? She looks familiar. Is she the mystery woman?" Emily's heartbeat pounded against her ribs. Her vision blurred for a moment. Ethan leaned closer without touching her. "Look straight ahead," he murmured. "Ignore everything else." She did. She lifted her chin, inhaled slowly, and followed him along the carpeted walkway leading into the summit building. But with each step she felt the weight of being examined, judged, categorized. Her dress felt too bright. Her shoes too expensive for her feet. Her entire existence too fragile for this world. When one photographer stepped too close, Ethan shifted subtly, placing himself between her and the man guiding her forward with the faintest touch on her back. It was part of the contract, a simple gesture, a rehearsed placement. Yet the warmth of his palm seemed to seep through the fabric, steadying her. Inside the venue, the noise changed from chaotic to curated. The hum of conversation, glasses clinking, a live jazz ensemble playing near the stage, and overhead screens displayed the Hale Point logo beside floating graphics of projected growth and global expansion. Emily's awe was immediate. The scale of everything, the sleekness, the formality. She felt like she had stepped into a different universe. Ethan moved with effortless precision, shaking hands with industry leaders, nodding to investors, acknowledging board members. The crowd treated him like a storm they could not ignore, powerful and impossible to look away from. Meanwhile, Emily felt like she was balancing on a tightrope she never trained for. A few guests smiled politely at her. Many did not. Some stared with thinly veiled confusion. One woman whispered to her friend loud enough for Emily to hear, "That girl cannot be from any of the usual families." Ethan remained unfazed, though she sensed he heard it too. Then Richard Hale approached. Tall, sharp suit, smile that did not touch his eyes. Ethan, nephew. And this must be the woman of the hour. Emily forced a polite smile. Richard extended a hand, but his eyes dragged over her dress, her shoes, her posture, as though comparing her to an invisible checklist she would never pass. "I must say, Ethan, this is unexpected. She looks different from your usual circles." The implication was clear. Different meant unworthy. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Emily is exactly who I want standing beside me." Richard's brows lifted with slow amusement. "Is that so?" His gaze returned to Emily. "And what do you do, my dear?" Emily answered honestly. "I work at a diner." Richard's smile froze. A diner. The way he said it felt like a stain, a flaw, a punchline. Emily braced for Ethan to speak, but someone else approached first. Clara Morgan, Ethan's senior assistant. A striking woman in her early 30s with sleek hair, a flawless suit, and eyes that tracked everything. Clara greeted Richard before turning to Ethan. "You did not tell me you were bringing someone tonight," she said with a bright but strained smile. Emily offered a small nod. Clara studied her for half a second too long before saying smoothly, "Well, I suppose surprises can be exciting." The words dripped with quiet disapproval. Ethan did not react outwardly. Instead, he touched Emily's back again, guiding her toward the stage area. She exhaled, tension easing only slightly. The night unfolded in a series of introductions, conversations, and flashes of cameras. Emily did her best to follow Ethan's lead. When he paused, she paused. When he smiled politely, she mimicked it. When he spoke, she listened carefully, learning the rhythm of the world he belonged to. Yet, beneath all the glamour, she could feel one truth anchoring itself inside her. This world did not want her here, and it sensed her presence like a disruption. When they reached the far corner of the hall, a momentary quiet fell between them. She whispered, "I am sorry if I embarrassed you." Ethan looked at her with a firmness that surprised her. "You did not embarrass me. Anyone who makes you feel small is irrelevant." Her breath stilled. He held her gaze just long enough for the words to settle inside her before he looked away. But even that brief exchange eased the tightness in her chest. As the evening continued, she saw more eyes judge her, more whispers trail behind her, more glances question who she was and why she stood beside Ethan Hale. Yet Ethan never stepped away from her, never hesitated, never let go of the subtle touch at her back guiding her forward. It was the first time she realized the truth of their arrangement. To the world, it was a lie. But in the way he shielded her, reassured her, and refused to let her falter, the lie felt unexpectedly real. And as photographers snapped their final shots, Emily understood something she had not before. Tonight was only the beginning of the performance the world expected, and she was already in deeper than she thought. The morning after the Seattle Tech Summit began quietly in the penthouse sunlight stretching across the polished floors like soft gold. Emily woke slowly in the guest room Ethan had assigned her, still half convinced that the previous night had been a dream or a hallucination shaped by exhaustion. But the view outside her window confirmed everything. Lake Washington shimmered beneath the early light. The city skyline rose in crisp lines, and she was living inside a world that did not belong to her. She pulled her hair into a loose ponytail, changed into simple clothes, and stepped cautiously into the hallway. Ethan was already awake, standing in the open kitchen with a mug of coffee in hand, wearing a gray shirt with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. He looked different like this, less like the billionaire the world photographed and more like a man who had not slept enough. "Morning," he said without looking up. His voice was calm as always, but something softer lingered beneath it. "Morning," she replied, unsure if she was allowed to be in his kitchen without permission. "There is coffee if you want some," he gestured toward the counter. She hesitated before pouring a cup, trying not to spill anything or look out of place. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It felt almost natural, as though they had done this 100 times. After a moment, Ethan turned toward her. "You handled yourself well yesterday." She almost choked on her coffee. "I thought I looked terrified." "You did, but you handled it." There was no teasing in his tone, only an unexpected honesty that made her chest warm. She leaned against the counter. "People noticed I did not belong. They noticed you were beside me. That is what mattered." She looked away, unsure how to respond. Compliments from men in her world usually came with ulterior motives. Ethan's felt strangely clean. Later that morning, she found him in his office reviewing documents, the glow of the screens reflecting off the sharp lines of his face. He looked tense shadows beneath his eyes. "You should rest," she said before she could stop herself. He did not look up. "Rest is inefficient." She frowned. "Humans need sleep. Efficiency comes after that." His fingers paused on the keyboard. When he finally looked at her, the tension in his shoulders eased a fraction. "You sound certain." "I am a waitress," she said. "I have seen people fall asleep in booths from exhaustion. You are giving the same energy." The corner of his mouth lifted so slightly she almost missed it. A ghost of a smile. She blinked, startled. It was the first time she had seen anything close to humor from him. He shut the laptop. Emily thought that would be the end of it. But then he said quietly, "What do you suggest?" She did not know he was asking because he trusted her judgment more than most people around him. She only knew he looked tired. "Come with me," she said impulsively. "I want to show you something." His brow lifted, intrigued despite himself. A few minutes later, they stood on the rooftop terrace, the cool wind brushing against them as the city stretched below. She walked to the railing and closed her eyes, letting the air settle around her. "Do that," she said. "Just breathe." He gave her a skeptical look, but eventually stepped closer. He inhaled slowly, awkwardly, like someone who had not paused in years. When he exhaled, his shoulders dropped a full inch. Emily smiled softly. "Better." He glanced at her, studying her with quiet curiosity. "You find calm easily." "I have had to. Otherwise I would go crazy." His gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. Then he said something she did not expect. "Stay a little longer. I have not felt quiet like this in a long time." Her breath caught. She nodded. They stood together without speaking, two people from worlds too distant for logic to connect. Yet closeness threaded itself between them like a quiet thread. Later that afternoon, Ethan emerged from a call looking unusually tense. "Paparazzi found out where you work," he said. "They tried to take photos of the diner and asked your manager questions." Her heart dropped. "Oh no. They told everyone you were not there. But we need to prepare." "Prepare for what?" "Being recognized, being photographed, being watched." She sank into the nearest chair. "I do not know how to do any of that. You will learn. I will teach you." She looked up, startled by his certainty. "Why are you being nice to me?" For a moment he did not speak. Then he walked toward her, slowly stopping just close enough for his voice to drop into something gentler. "Because you do not pretend. Because you look at me like I am a person and not a headline. Because you remind me of things I forgot mattered." Her breath unsteadied. She did not know how to handle vulnerability from someone like him, someone who seemed carved from stone most days. Before she could respond, he stepped back as if realizing he had revealed too much. "I am going to make tea," he said, voice returning to its neutral tone. "Do you want some?" She nodded mutely, trying to calm the fluttering inside her chest. That evening, while Ethan worked in his office again, Emily wandered into the living room. The penthouse was beautiful, but cold. Too symmetrical, too perfect. It felt like a museum. She found a small vase hidden behind one of the shelves, dusty and unused. Without thinking, she took it outside to the small terrace garden, clipped a few fresh sprigs from the only plant thriving there, and arranged them inside. When she placed the vase on the dining table, the room shifted. Just a little. Just enough. When Ethan walked out later, he paused, noticing the change immediately. "You did that?" She nodded, suddenly shy. "I thought the room needed something alive, something warm." He looked at the vase again, then at her. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, something that did not belong to contracts or obligations, something real. Later that night, she heard footsteps and peeked out of her room. Ethan stood by the windows, unable to sleep, staring at the lake with a heaviness that made her chest ache. She stepped closer. "Are you having trouble sleeping?" He did not turn. "I always do." She hesitated before saying, "Would you like some chamomile tea? I can make it." He looked at her then, and this time the softness in his eyes was unmistakable. "Yes, please." She brewed the tea slowly, hoping the warmth would help him. When she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed. Only for a second, but the contact sent a quiet shock through her. He felt it too. She saw it in the stillness of his expression. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Emily." She returned to her room, heart pounding. She did not know what was happening, but she felt it. A shift, a pull. A closeness growing quietly in the spaces between words. A connection neither of them had meant to form, but could no longer ignore. The storm rolled into Seattle just after sunset, sweeping across the lake with such force that the wind rattled the glass walls of the penthouse. Emily stood near the window, watching the sky darken the clouds, folding into each other like bruises spreading above the city. The forecast had warned of power outages, but she had not expected the air to feel so heavy as though the storm had been waiting for this night. Ethan was in his office finishing a call with investors, his voice low and steady, even as thunder shook the building. He always sounded controlled, always anchored, always sure. Emily had begun to rely on that steadiness more than she meant to. When the lights flickered the first time, she told herself it was nothing. When they went out completely, she froze. A soft gasp escaped before she could swallow it. Darkness filled the penthouse so completely she could not see her own hands. Emily took one step forward and bumped into the table, heart racing. Ethan appeared a second later, his silhouette cutting through the faint glow of emergency hallway lights seeping under the door. "Emily, are you all right?" She exhaled shakily. "Yes." Just startled. He stepped closer, and for a moment she could only hear the rain pounding against the glass and Ethan's calm breath. He reached for the drawer near the kitchen and retrieved a small flashlight, turning it on. The soft beam carved gentle light across the room. "Here," he said quietly. "Stay close so you do not trip." She nodded and stepped toward him, drawn more to his steadiness than to the light itself. The outage meant no heating system, no music, no ambient light. The penthouse suddenly felt much larger and much colder. Ethan lit a few emergency candles, their glow warm and flickering. Emily sat on the edge of the couch, hugging her arms as the chill seeped through her clothes. Ethan noticed. Without comment, he walked to his closet, returned with a charcoal gray hoodie and held it out. "Wear this. It is warmer." Emily hesitated, fingers brushing the soft fabric. "Are you sure? It is yours." He met her eyes. "And tonight you need it more than I do." She slipped the hoodie over her head. It was far too big for her sleeves, hanging past her fingers, soft and smelling faintly of cedar and something crisp she could not name. The warmth hit her almost instantly. "Thank you," she murmured. Ethan took a seat on the opposite side of the couch. Candlelight cast moving shadows across his face, softening the sharp lines she usually saw. For a moment, they simply listened to the storm, neither speaking. She tucked her legs beneath her, suddenly aware of how strangely intimate the quiet felt. No noise from the city, no screens, no distractions. Just the storm outside and the two of them inside breathing in the same warm circle of candlelight. She glanced at him. "You seem calm for someone whose entire building just lost electricity." He sighed lightly. "When you grow up in a family that thrives on chaos, you learn not to react unless the ceiling actually collapses." Emily smiled gently. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." He rested his elbow on the back of the couch, turning slightly toward her. "What about you? You seem calm, too." "I am not. I am freezing and nervous and trying not to think about how high up we are. But you are holding together. Because I have to. Someone has to." His eyes lingered on her as if he were trying to decode the layers she hid beneath confidence she barely felt. He spoke more quietly. "You carry a lot for someone your age." She swallowed. "I did not have much of a choice." The storm cracked above them, lightning flashing across the lake. Emily flinched instinctively, leaning toward the only source of warmth. Ethan noticed her movement, but did not comment. Instead, he shifted just slightly enough that the candlelight fell between them like a shared border. After a moment, she whispered, "Do you ever get scared?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Of storms, of anything, of everything." He held her gaze longer this time. "Yes." Emily waited. He inhaled slowly. "I am afraid of losing control, of failing the people who depend on me, of trusting the wrong person, of letting someone close enough to hurt me." She felt her heartbeat slow, deepening with something she did not want to name. She spoke softly. "I guess we are both afraid of the same things." Ethan's expression shifted, something vulnerable moving beneath his usual calm. The storm thundered again, and Emily drew in a quick breath. She looked toward the bedroom hallway, then back at him. "Do we have to share a bed tonight?" She said it softly, almost embarrassed, like the words might break if she spoke them too loudly. His eyes softened, the first crack of warmth breaking through his controlled exterior. "Only if you want me there." She looked down at her hands. "I do not want to be alone, but I also do not want you to feel obligated." Ethan leaned forward slightly enough for the candlelight to brush across his features. "Nothing about being near you feels like an obligation." Her breath caught. The honesty in his voice wrapped around her like another layer of warmth. She had never expected him to say something so unguarded. They stayed on the couch for a long moment, the silence gentle now, rather than suffocating. She pulled her knees closer to her chest, curling into his oversized hoodie. Ethan watched her with quiet thoughtfulness, as if memorizing the shape of her in candlelight. When the storm softened, he spoke again. "You asked earlier if I ever get scared." She nodded. His gaze drifted toward the window, rain sliding down the glass in shimmering streaks. "I am scared now." She stiffened. "Why?" "Because you feel like something I do not know how to protect." Emily's heart stumbled over itself, flustered by the rawness behind his words. Before she could respond, he stood slowly. "You should rest. The electrical grid will likely be out for another hour. I will stay awake and keep an eye on everything." She rose too. "You do not have to stay awake for me." He turned back to her, eyes steady. "I am not staying awake for you. I am staying awake because I do not sleep well when the world feels uncertain." She stepped closer, her voice softer. "Then sit with me, just for a little bit." His jaw tightened, not with resistance, but with something like surrender. He nodded. They sat again, closer this time. In the flickering candlelight, their shoulders almost touched. Their breaths fell into the same rhythm. Neither spoke the truth written quietly between them. Something had shifted, something irreversible. When the storm finally began to calm, Ethan looked at her with a gravity that made her pulse flutter. "Tonight changed things," he said quietly. Emily could only nod. Yes, it did. Morning light crept through the penthouse windows with a gentleness that felt unearned after the storm that had wrapped itself around the night before. Emily woke, curled into the soft fabric of Ethan's hoodie still faintly warmed from his presence hours earlier. She sat on the couch alone. Now the candles burned down to small pools of wax, the room quiet except for the low hum of electricity that had finally returned. For a moment she wondered if she had imagined everything, the closeness, the honesty, the quiet shift that had passed between them like a breath. But the hoodie around her shoulders reminded her it had been real. She stood and folded it neatly, placing it on the back of the couch just as Ethan emerged from the hallway wearing a fresh shirt, but still carrying the same restrained exhaustion in his eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked softly. He shook his head once. "I rested enough." She did not push. Something about him looked fragile in a way she had not seen before, like even asking too many questions could make the moment collapse. He poured coffee for both of them, handing her a cup without a word. Their fingers brushed lightly, sending a quiet ripple through the air, but neither commented on it. Instead, they drank in a silence that felt strangely comfortable. But peace has a way of slipping through cracks no one notices. The first crack came that afternoon. Ethan had left for a meeting, and Emily wandered through the penthouse trying to familiarize herself with a world she still felt like a visitor in. She had just begun wiping fingerprints from the kitchen counter. Old habits from years in food service. When a sharp knock sounded at the door, she froze. No one ever came without an appointment. When she opened it, Clara Morgan stood on the threshold. Perfectly composed. Perfectly polished. Perfectly wrong. Emily instinctively stepped back. Clara entered without waiting to be invited, her heels tapping against the marble floor like judgment made audible. So she said, drawing out the word as her eyes swept over the living room, "You really are living here." Emily swallowed. "Ethan asked me to." Clara raised a brow, her smile thin. "Of course he did. He always did have a weakness for taking in strays." The words hit like a small slap. Emily stiffened. "I am not a stray." Clara's eyebrow lifted a fraction more. "If you say so." She walked further inside, examining the room as though searching for something out of place. Then her gaze pinned Emily with a sweetness so sharp it cut. "You know this will not last." Emily's breath caught. "I am here because of the contract. That is all." Clara's smile sharpened. "Exactly. Contracts end. People like you are temporary." She let the words linger heavy and pointed. Before Emily could respond, Clara added softly, "You should prepare yourself for what happens when the real world finds out." Emily frowned. What real world? But Clara only turned toward the door, giving a final, practiced smile. "Good luck, Miss Reyes. You will need it." When the door closed, Emily sank onto the couch, heart pounding. Something about Clara's visit felt wrong, like it had been designed to plant a seed of fear. But she tried to push the unease away. Ethan trusts her, she reminded herself. Clara is just protective of his image. Still, the encounter stayed with her long after she tried to forget it. That night, Ethan returned shoulders tense from meetings. She debated whether to mention Clara's visit, but decided against it. He looked exhausted, weighed down by pressures she could barely imagine. Instead, she made tea and placed it before him quietly. He stared at the cup for a long moment before lifting his gaze to hers. "Thank you," he said softly. She nodded. They sat together in a silence warmer than words. But while Emily tried to ignore the tension bubbling beneath the surface, Clara did not forget their conversation and did not intend to let Emily remain invisible. The next morning, Emily stepped into the lobby ready to run a quick errand before the next practice session for their public appearances. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair tied loosely. Normal, ordinary, unremarkable, or so she thought. She had barely reached the corner convenience store when she sensed people staring, whispering, phones lifting discreetly. A woman brushed past and murmured, "That is her." Emily froze. Her pulse quickened. Had news spread about the contract? Had someone leaked something? She ducked into the store, heart racing, but what she saw inside made her stomach drop. A rack of tabloids sat near the counter and her face stared back at her from one of them. Ethan Hale's new companion. Not who you'd expect. Waitress moves into Bellevue penthouse overnight. Photos followed grainy taken from far away, yet unmistakably her. One showed her stepping into Ethan's car the first night. Another captured her entering the building. Her hands trembled as she grabbed the magazine. How did they get these photos? She whispered the words, but the cashier only shrugged. Paparazzi, do not sleep, honey. Outside, another camera flashed. She panicked. Her breath shortened. She ran back toward the building, heart slamming inside her chest. When she reached the elevator, she pressed the button with shaking fingers, willing the doors to close faster. As she stepped into the penthouse, she found Ethan pacing the living room phone pressed to his ear, jaw clenched. When he saw her, his expression changed instantly. Emily. He ended the call abruptly and crossed the room. Are you all right? She held out the magazine with trembling hands. They took pictures of me. They printed lies. They called me his companion. Ethan's eyes hardened. Who leaked this? She could only shake her head. I do not know. But then the final crack hit her phone, buzzed with a notification. A video. She pressed play. It was footage of her leaving the convenience store moments earlier. People calling her gold digger. A reporter shouting questions about whether she had tricked Ethan into a relationship. Her breath stuttered. Ethan watched her face pale and stepped closer. Emily, listen to me. We will fix this. But before he could finish, another notification pinged. Another video. A leaked screenshot of the contract's cover page. His voice dropped dangerously low. Someone inside my company did this. Emily shook her head, stepping back. I am destroying your life. I never should have agreed to this. He caught her wrist gently. You are not destroying anything. You are the only part of this that is worth protecting. She stared at him, chest tight. Outside, another camera flashed against the window light, cutting through the room like a warning. Her voice broke. I cannot stay here, not like this, Emily. Wait. But she pulled away, grabbed her coat and ran toward the door, tears blurring her vision. The last thing she heard before the elevator closed was Ethan's voice calling her name, full of a fear he had never allowed anyone to hear before. Ethan barely slept that night. The penthouse felt painfully empty without Emily's presence lingering in the corners, without her soft footsteps, without the way she somehow warmed a space simply by existing in it. Every room he stepped into echoed with the absence of her. By morning, all he had left was fury sharpened into something cold and precise. Someone inside his company had betrayed him. Someone had leaked the contract cover page. Someone had followed Emily. Someone had turned her into a target. And he knew exactly who would stand to benefit. The Hale Point board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., but Ethan arrived before 8. He stood alone at the head of the long glass table overlooking the skyline, with a jaw clenched tight enough to ache. On the screen in front of him were headlines painting Emily as a manipulative opportunist and him as a careless CEO blinded by lust. Lies. All of it. The door swung open. Board members filed in one by one, murmuring among themselves. Some avoided his gaze as if they already knew what was coming. Others looked too eager, too ready to sink their teeth into scandal. Richard Hale entered last calm and polished as though he had not orchestrated the chaos that had consumed Ethan's life in 24 hours. Beside him walked Clara Morgan. Her eyes flickered toward Ethan, unsteady, almost remorseful, but she still took a seat at Richard's side. Ethan's chest tightened. He felt anger claw up his spine. When the clock hit 9, Richard cleared his throat theatrically. It appears we have a crisis. Ethan did not sit. I wonder how that crisis got out, he replied, voice controlled but glacial. Richard offered a sympathetic smile that did not reach his eyes. Oh, Ethan, the problem is not who leaked it. The problem is what was leaked. He pressed a button on his tablet. The room's central screen lit up with enlarged images of Emily and Ethan. Emily stepping into the car, Emily entering the penthouse. Emily's face circled in red, the tabloids, the leaked contract cover page, and worst of all, a still frame of Emily running from paparazzi eyes wide with fear. Ethan gripped the edge of the table. This is harassment. She is not a public figure, the board murmured. Richard raised a hand. The public believes she manipulated you into marriage for financial gain. Our company's stock has dropped 4% since midnight. Our investors are calling for reassurance. I am giving them reassurance, Ethan replied sharply. Richard tilted his head. Are you? Because right now it appears you have used company resources to house a young woman with no background, no credentials, no proven intentions. The implication slithered through the room. Ethan's fists tightened. Richard continued, voice smooth. You claim this marriage is legitimate, yet you hide it. You keep her out of public view. You refuse to provide statements. What are we supposed to believe? Ethan stepped forward. I married her for a reason, but I fell for her by accident. A ripple of whispers filled the room. Clara's eyes widened. Richard's expression sharpened instantly, panic flickering beneath the surface before he masked it with derision. A touching confession, he said. But the truth is simpler. He pressed another button. The screen changed. A zoomed-in photograph of the original contract binder sitting on Ethan's desk. Richard's voice cut through the air like a blade. You married a waitress under contractual conditions. That is not love, that is manipulation, and now it threatens the stability of the company. Gasps, shocked mutters. Ethan felt heat rising in his chest but forced his voice steady. The contract was protective, a shield. It was meant to give her safety and me privacy. It was not a trick. Richard smiled. The board will decide that. Clara's voice trembled as she spoke for the first time. Maybe we should focus on the evidence. Her eyes flickered toward Ethan, guilt buried beneath her composure. Richard nodded at her. Yes, let us. He tapped again. A new image filled the screen. Emily, leaving the penthouse with tears on her face, suitcase in hand. But the image had been cropped and filtered to make it look like she was sneaking out at dawn and hiding her face. The narrative was clear. Emily, leaving, suggested guilt. Emily crying suggested she had been caught. Emily's absence suggested wrongdoing. Ethan felt something inside him break. You manipulated this, he said quietly. You edited that photo. Richard raised a brow. Prove it. The room fell silent, and then Richard delivered the final blow. Effective immediately, we call for a vote on limiting Ethan Hale's decision-making authority pending a full internal investigation into the misuse of power, the inappropriate relationship with an employee class individual, and the potential financial misconduct regarding the contract. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. This was the plan all along. Destroy Emily. Use scandal to corner him. Force him out so Richard could take power. One of the older board members cleared his throat nervously. Ethan, do you deny that the contract exists? Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Then he looked straight at them. No, I do not deny it. The room erupted. Richard smirked. Thank you. That will be all we need. Ethan raised his voice sharply. But you will hear the rest. Silence. He continued. I did not marry her for convenience. I did not marry her for image. I saw her helping someone who had nothing, giving away food she paid for with money she barely had, and I realized she had more integrity than anyone in this room. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Richard tapped his fingers against the table. Heartwarming, but irrelevant. He turned to the board. Shall we vote? A chorus of uncertain nods moved through the room. Ethan looked around at faces he had worked with for years, some loyal, some fearful, some too weak to stand up to Richard. Before the vote began, the screen behind Ethan flickered again. Unauthorized file access detected. The security system chimed. Richard's smile disappeared. Ethan narrowed his eyes. Someone had tried to pull up restricted files. Someone panicked. Someone covering tracks. A message flashed across the screen. Corrupted video file recovered. Ethan's heart slammed in his chest. And then the image appeared, a grainy clip. Someone handing Clara an envelope in the parking garage. Clara's face visible. Richard's voice faint in the background. Clara's breath hitched. Her complexion turned bone white. The room fell into stunned silence. Ethan stepped forward, voice low and lethal. "Now, let us talk about manipulation." That was when Richard finally lost his composure. For one suspended second, the boardroom remained frozen, the only movement coming from the trembling pixels of the projected security video. Clara's face on the screen turned toward the man handing her an envelope, and even through the grainy resolution, the exchange was unmistakable. Money. Collusion. Betrayal. The board members stared in stunned silence, the air thick with disbelief and the sound of Richard's carefully built narrative beginning to crumble. Clara's real self sat at the end of the table, color drained from her cheeks. Her hands clutched together so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Richard looked at her sharply, a silent command embedded in his glare, a last attempt to force her silence. But the damage was already spreading like a crack across glass. Ethan inhaled slowly, letting the tension settle before he spoke. His voice was calm, too. Calm, the type of calm that preceded the collapse of something long overdue. "Would you like to explain that, Clara?" Clara swallowed, eyes darting between Ethan, the screen, and Richard. She opened her mouth, but no words came. A senior board member leaned forward. "Miss Morgan, were you compensated by Mr. Richard Hale in exchange for providing confidential materials?" Clara choked on a breath. Another clip appeared automatically, the system pulling up connected files. Richard's voice in the parking garage. "Make sure the contract page is photographed cleanly, leak it anonymously. Emily, leaving the penthouse in tears. That image will bury Ethan in the vote." Gasps broke through the room like cracks in dam walls. Clara covered her mouth with shaking hands. "I didn't want to," she whispered. "I didn't think it would go this far." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You leaked the contract?" She nodded, breathing ragged. "Richard promised me a promotion. He said you forgot I existed. He said you would never choose someone like me to stand by your side. He said all you cared about was the company." Her voice cracked guilt and humiliation dripping through every word. "I was angry. I made the worst decision of my life." Richard slammed his palm on the table. "Enough. This is irrelevant and illegally obtained. That video proves nothing." Ethan turned to him. "It proves everything." Richard straightened, shifting into the tone he used to charm investors and manipulate public opinion. "I will not sit here while a doctored video," the screen changed again. The system flashed data integrity verified. File genuine. Silence swallowed the room. "You bribed my assistant," Ethan said quietly. "You created false narratives to destroy my marriage and my credibility. You manipulated images of Emily to frame her as a threat, and you exploited your position for personal gain." Richard's mask slipped. His expression hardened into something sharp and venomous. "This girl is going to ruin this company," he spat. "She already has. You are too blinded to see it." Ethan stepped forward, voice rising with controlled power. "The only threat here is you. You weaponized the board, the media, and my assistant. You leaked private information to tank confidence and claim my position." He turned to the board. "All because you hate that my father chose me." Richard shot to his feet. He should not have. He should never have given control to a child who doesn't understand how to protect the family legacy. Ethan held his gaze cold and unwavering. "The legacy is not the problem. Your greed is." Several board members nodded, subtly shifting away from Richard's influence. One cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, I believe it is time for a formal internal vote regarding your standing in this company." Richard smirked. "Finally." The member raised a hand. "Not Ethan's standing. Yours." Richard's face contorted with disbelief. "What?" the member continued. "Based on the new evidence, we move to vote on the immediate suspension of Richard Hale, pending a full investigation into bribery, breach of fiduciary duty, falsification of company-related media, coercion of staff, and attempted manipulation of board outcomes." The room stirred with shocked whispers. Clara pressed a trembling hand against her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks now. Ethan stood perfectly still, expression unreadable as he watched the consequences unfold. One by one, the board members raised their hands in favor of the motion. Majority reached. The chairperson delivered the final blow. Richard Hale is hereby removed from all decision-making authority, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Richard glanced around wildly, desperate, cornered. His gaze landed on Ethan. "You think this is over? You think you won?" Ethan met his eyes with the steady calm of a man who had finally stopped running from a shadow that had followed him his entire life. This was never a competition. This was justice. Security approached. Richard stiffened, but did not resist. His final glare at Ethan was filled with a rage that promised future attempts at vengeance, but for now, he was powerless. The door shut behind him, leaving a vacuum of silence. Clara sobbed softly into her hands. The guilt in her posture was undeniable. Ethan did not yell. He did not lash out. He simply watched her with a weary sadness. "Why, Clara?" She looked up through tears. "Because I wanted matter. I wanted to be important, and Richard made me feel seen." Ethan's voice softened unexpectedly. "You were important. You always were. You just chose to follow someone who saw your insecurity instead of your value." Clara shook her head, face crumpling. "I am so sorry. I will testify. I will admit everything. Just please fix what I broke." Ethan nodded once. Then he turned away. He no longer had time to fix Clara. He no longer had time to dwell on betrayal or corporate warfare. He only had time for one thing, one person. Emily. His voice barely rose above a whisper, but the room felt it. "I need to find her." Without waiting for protocol or follow-up questions, Ethan grabbed his coat and strode out of the boardroom with a resolve so fierce it silenced every remaining whisper. The truth had come out. The lies had fallen, but the cost was the one thing he could not bear. He had lost Emily. Rain had begun again over Tacoma, not the heavy storm from the night of the outage, but a gentler, steady curtain of cold water that made the world look washed out and softened. It soaked the narrow streets and collected in shimmering puddles beneath the flickering streetlights. Emily stood beneath the thin awning of the small room she had rented, really more of a storage unit with a bed its walls thin enough for the draft to slip through. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring out into the street without really seeing anything at all. Her clothes were damp from the walk back, her hair sticking to her cheeks, her breath misting in the cold air. She had been crying earlier quietly, and though the tears had dried, the ache remained. Everything hurt. Not just the humiliation, not just the fear, but the feeling that she had ruined someone's life without ever meaning to. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "This is for the best. He deserves someone stronger." Then the rain shifted, a car door slammed. Soft footsteps splashed across the pavement. Emily's heart fluttered painfully, and she turned, breath catching in her throat. Ethan stood in the rain without an umbrella, water running down his hair, soaking through his shirt and coat, as if he had not even noticed the storm around him. His chest rose and fell, breath heavy, almost ragged, as though he had run the entire way from Seattle. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither spoke. They simply looked at each other, two people pulled together by something neither understood until they were already standing inside it. Ethan took one slow step forward, his voice rough and hoarse from cold and exhaustion. "Emily." She swallowed, her fingers tightening around the edge of the awning. "Why are you here?" she whispered. "You should not be here. You should be with your company, fixing everything." Ethan stepped fully into the awning's dim light rain dripping from his hair onto the worn concrete between them. "I do not care about the company right now," he said quietly. "I care about you." Her breath shook. "Do not say that. You saw the headlines. You saw what they did to you because of me. You cannot afford to care." His voice cracked openly. "I cannot afford not to." She looked away, her chin trembling. Ethan stepped closer, slow enough not to startle her, but certain enough that she understood he would not leave until he said what he had come to say. "Emily, please look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes. There, beneath the rain and the exhaustion and the shadows, she saw something she had not seen before: fear. Real fear, the kind that came from losing something that mattered. His voice dropped to something raw. "I thought the worst thing that could happen was losing my position, losing the company, losing my reputation." He paused, water dripping from his eyelashes. "I was wrong. The worst thing was losing you." Her breath hitched. Ethan stepped closer, so close now she could feel the warmth of him even through the cold air. "You left because you thought you were hurting me. But the truth is—" He swallowed, voice shaking. "Losing you is the only thing that has actually hurt." She shook her head, tears filling her eyes again. "I am not the person you think I am. I am no one. A waitress. A girl who was desperate and broke and stupid enough to sign a contract she did not belong in." Ethan's expression tightened. "You think I chose you because I needed someone convenient, someone easy to hide." She blinked, confused. "I saw you long before that night in the rain," he said softly. "I saw you give food to a man beneath the underpass. Food you needed for yourself. You did not know anyone was watching. You were not performing. You were not pretending. You simply cared." Emily's lips parted slowly, disbelief flickering through her expression. Ethan stepped even closer now, only inches from her. "That night changed something in me. It made me realize I had been surrounded my whole life by people who wanted something from me, my power, my influence, my name. But you gave something for nothing. You were kindness in a world that does not even remember what kindness looks like." Her voice trembled. "That is not enough to build a life on." He shook his head. "That is not why I am here." Rainwater streamed down his face as he said the words that would rewrite everything between them. "Emily, you were never a contract to me." A soft sound escaped her half-gasp, half-sob as the sentence settled between them like the final truth she had been running from. Ethan's breath shuddered. "The contract ends today, right now, right here. Not because of the board, not because of the scandal, not because we have to fix anything, but because it no longer matters." Pain and longing collided in her chest. "Then why are you here?" He took a step closer, one more, then one more until he was directly in front of her, the rain forming a curtain behind him. "Because I am asking you to stay. Not as my wife on paper, not as a name in a binder, but as my partner in life." Emily covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming freely now. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her cheek gently, thumb brushing away a tear already replaced by rain. "You deserve a life where someone chooses you every single day, and I am standing here in the rain because I am choosing you." She let out a trembling sob, every barrier inside her, softening, collapsing, opening. "I do not know if I am enough," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "You are more than enough. You are the only real thing I have had in a long time." She closed her eyes, overwhelmed. When she opened them again, she nodded slowly, then fully, as though releasing months of fear in a single movement. "Yes." Ethan exhaled a breath that sounded like relief and disbelief woven together. He pulled her into his arms, not with urgency, not with possession, but with the kind of tenderness that made her lean into him instinctively. The rain continued falling around them, soft and silver, but here beneath the awning, wrapped in each other's warmth, they stood in a quiet miracle neither had expected to find. Emily whispered against his shoulder, voice trembling with hope. "Take me home." Ethan held her tighter. Always. 1 year later, Seattle felt different, not because the city had changed, but because life finally moved at a pace Ethan and Emily could breathe in. The storms of scandal were long gone, replaced by a gentler rhythm they built together in a small house near Lake Union. It was nothing like the penthouse. The ceilings here were lower, the windows older, the walls slightly uneven in places where the previous owner had tried and failed at DIY repairs. But sunlight streamed through the kitchen in the mornings like a warm blessing, and the air always carried the faint scent of lake water mixed with roasted coffee from the small cafe down the street. Emily loved it instantly. Ethan grew to love it because she did. On this particular morning, she stood barefoot in the kitchen wearing one of Ethan's old shirts, stirring warm oatmeal with blueberries while humming a soft tune under her breath. Through the window, she could see the lake outside, waves glittering beneath early sunlight. She felt peaceful, grounded, alive. Behind her, she heard slow footsteps, the familiar pattern of Ethan waking up, stretching, then wandering toward the smell of breakfast with a mix of sleepiness and curiosity. He entered the kitchen with tousled hair, wearing a simple t-shirt and gray sweatpants, far from the tailored suits of his old life. But she still felt that same flutter in her chest every time he looked at her with softened morning eyes. "Morning," he murmured, voice still rough with sleep. "Morning," she replied, smiling. He leaned against the counter and watched her pour oatmeal into 2 bowls. "You woke up early again?" She shrugged. "Habit. I wanted to water the plants. And I like this time of day. Everything feels quiet." He stepped behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin gently on her shoulder. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, soaking in his warmth. These were the moments she treasured most, the small ones, the quiet ones, the ones where love did not need declarations because it breathed in the spaces between their movements. They ate breakfast together at the tiny wooden table Ethan had insisted on sanding down himself, even though it had taken him 3 times longer than a professional would have taken. Emily worked later that morning at the community center near downtown, where she spent her days organizing food drives and helping local shelters. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful, and she finally woke up every morning feeling like her life had purpose. After breakfast, Ethan walked her to the living room, where a stack of documents and his laptop sat open. He had stepped back from Hale Point over the past year, choosing a reduced leadership role instead of the suffocating full weight of the CEO title. He still had influence, still had power, but now he used it differently, with more compassion, more patience, more intention. Emily often told him he had become softer, but he would only shake his head and say he had simply become more himself. She grabbed her small canvas tote bag and opened the front door. The air outside was crisp, bright, and slightly cool as spring approached. Ethan kissed her forehead gently before she left, a gesture that had become their ritual. "Have a good day," he murmured. "You too," she said softly. "I love you." Even after a year, those words still made his breath pause. He whispered them back without hesitation. Always. Later that afternoon, Emily returned home tired but content after a long day of distributing care packages. She paused at the doorway when she saw Ethan in the living room surrounded by open boxes. "What are you doing?" she asked, amused. He glanced up, sheepish. "Trying to assemble a bookshelf?" She raised a brow. "Without instructions." He winced. They were in Swedish. Emily laughed, the sound filling the room, and set down her bag. "Come here," she said. "Let me help." Together they sat on the floor, sorting through pieces of wood and metal screws. Ethan read the steps aloud while Emily guided the framework into place. Every so often their fingers brushed, and each time they shared a soft smile, they no longer tried to hide. When the bookshelf was finally standing slightly crooked but sturdy enough, Ethan leaned back on his hands. "That was teamwork." Emily smirked. "That was me saving you from accidentally creating modern art." He chuckled, shaking his head. Then his expression softened. "I like building things with you." Emily's smile faded into something gentler. "Me too." The sun began to set outside their window, painting shades of pink and gold across the lake. Emily stood and stretched. Ethan rose as well, watching her for a long moment. She tilted her head. "You look like you are thinking too hard." He stepped closer. "Maybe I am thinking about how different life feels now." Her voice softened. "Better?" He nodded. "Much better." He reached for her hand. "Come with me." She followed him to the bedroom, their bedroom. It was their favorite place in the house not because it was big or luxurious, but because it felt theirs in a way no penthouse suite ever could. Soft blankets, warm lamplight, mismatched pillows Emily had chosen at thrift stores, a gentle space that held all the quiet moments they had built together. They stood near the bed, fingers intertwined. The same bed they had hesitated over a year ago. The same question that had once terrified her now felt like a distant memory. Emily looked up at him, eyes shimmering with warmth. So she said softly, a playful note in her voice, "We finally share a bed." Ethan gave a small affectionate laugh. This time his voice held no hesitation, no distance, only warmth. This time it is not in the contract. Emily smiled wider, stepping closer until her forehead rested gently against his chest. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her with the quiet certainty of someone who had found exactly where he belonged. Outside their window, Lake Union glowed beneath the fading light. The house creaked softly as the evening settled in. Their world had become simple, real, steady. They lay down together on the soft mattress, hands still clasped, watching the last traces of sunset fade. No storms, no secrets, no contracts. Just two people who had chosen each other once the world stopped pulling them apart. Emily whispered into the quiet room, voice filled with gratitude and quiet wonder, "Thank you for finding me that night." Ethan kissed her hair gently. "You found me too." And in the soft glow of twilight, wrapped in warmth and quiet promise, they closed their eyes together in the bed they finally shared, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. If you are still here with me listening to the very last words of Ethan and Emily's journey, then thank you. Stories like this are not just stories. They are reminders. Reminders that kindness matters even when the world feels harsh. Reminders that sometimes the smallest acts, a shared hoodie on a cold night, a cup of tea, a soft confession in the rain, can change the entire course of someone's life. And maybe most importantly, reminders that love does not always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the courage to stay, in the choice to return, in the willingness to see someone fully, flaws and fears and all, and choose them anyway. Before you go, let me ask you something. If you were Emily, walking alone in the rain with nowhere left to sleep, would you have trusted the stranger who stopped for you? Or would fear have made you turn away? And if you were Ethan, powerful, guarded, surrounded by people who only saw your wealth, would you have stopped your car that night? Would you have taken a chance on someone who had nothing to offer but a good heart? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know what you would do. And if you connected with this story even just a little, let me know where you are watching from. Our little storytelling family spans cities, states, and countries, and every time you say hello, it reminds me that we are all sitting around the same virtual campfire, sharing moments and emotions across distances. Was there a moment in this story that hit you hardest? Was it the contract offer, the betrayal, the boardroom collapse? Or was it that one line in the rain? You were never a contract to me. Let me know which scene stayed with you. And if you were cheering for Emily in that final chapter when she said yes, I want to hear that too. Your comments help me decide what stories to tell next, who to write about, which characters to bring to life, and which journeys to explore. Maybe you want a story about a single father who gets a second chance. Maybe you want a tale about a runaway bride. Or another billionaire who hides a broken heart behind polished marble walls. Or maybe you want Emily and Ethan to return in a short sequel one day. Just tell me. I read everything you write, and if you want more stories like this slow-burn romance, emotional undulation, dramatic twists, heartbreak, and healing, all woven together, make sure you do not forget to subscribe. It really does help more than you know. One last question before you go, and I want you to answer it from the heart. Do you believe that strangers can change each other's lives forever? Yes or no? Tell me in the comments, and tell me why. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening, loving, feeling, and imagining with me. I will see you in this next story, my friend.